Marcus Williams sat hunched in the back corner of his English classroom, praying his name wouldn't be called for the daily reading assignment. At 16, his severe stutter made every spoken word a battle, turning simple sentences into stumbling blocks that sent his classmates into fits of cruel laughter. Derek Thompson and his followers would mimic his speech, their voices dripping with mockery as they repeated his broken words. But what none of them knew was that in the quiet sanctuary of his bedroom, Marcus could recite entire Shakespeare plays with flawless precision, his voice flowing like honey when no one was listening. They saw only his weakness, never imagining the power that lay hidden beneath his stuttering exterior. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Marcus Williams had lived with his stutter for as long as he could remember. Each morning at Westfield High brought the same silent prayer that today would be different, that the words would flow freely from his lips, without catching and stumbling over themselves like broken glass. His speech therapist had tried countless techniques over the years, but nothing seemed to work when the pressure of speaking in front of others mounted. The simplest conversations became mountainous challenges, turning ordering lunch into an ordeal that left him sweating and frustrated. His mother, Sarah Williams, watched her son's daily struggles with a heart heavy with worry and love. She worked double shifts as a nurse to afford his speech therapy sessions, never complaining, but always hoping for a breakthrough that seemed perpetually out of reach. Sarah had noticed how Marcus retreated further into himself with each passing month, spending more time alone in his room, speaking less and less, even at home, where he felt safest. What Sarah didn't fully understand was the sanctuary Marcus had created within those four walls. His bedroom was a shrine to the greatest writer in the English language, with dog-eared copies of Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and King Lear stacked carefully on his desk and nightstand. Complete works of Shakespeare lined his bookshelf, their spines worn from countless readings. Posters of famous Shakespearean actors adorned his walls, their dramatic poses frozen in moments of theatrical triumph. In the quiet hours after school, Marcus would sit cross-legged on his bed, opening these treasured volumes and losing himself completely in the rich language and complex characters. His eyes would dance across the pages as he absorbed every word, every rhythm, every emotional nuance. Here, in the silence of his room, Shakespeare's words became his refuge from a world that seemed designed to highlight his failures. The beautiful language filled the spaces where his own words failed him, giving voice to feelings he could never express aloud. These moments of silent reading were the only times Marcus felt truly free, unbound by the prison of his stuttering tongue. Room 214 at Westfield High was a typical English classroom, with rows of worn desks arranged in neat lines facing a whiteboard that had seen better days. Motivational posters about reading and writing hung on cream-colored walls, their edges curled from years of use. Tall windows on the east side let in morning light that illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere that would have been perfect for studying drama, if not for the toxic social dynamics that played out daily within these walls. Derek Thompson ruled this classroom like a king presiding over his court. 17 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an athletic build that came from years on the football team, Derek possessed the kind of natural confidence that attracted followers and intimidated targets. He dressed in expensive name-brand clothes that his wealthy parents provided without question, always ensuring his appearance projected success and superiority. His desk sat strategically in the middle of the room, where he could command attention and orchestrate the social hierarchy with calculated precision. Surrounding Derek were his loyal followers, each playing their role in the daily theater of cruelty. Jake Morrison sat to his right, a stocky boy who laughed loudest at Derek's jokes and never missed an opportunity to pile on when someone became a target. Behind them, twins Ashley and Brittany Chen nodded approvingly at Derek's every comment, their synchronized reactions adding to the pack mentality that made resistance seem impossible. These students fed off Derek's energy, finding their own sense of belonging by participating in his campaigns of social destruction. Mrs. Henderson had taught English at Westfield High for nearly 20 years, and while her intentions were genuinely good, Her classroom management skills had grown stale with time. A woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she wore cardigans and comfortable shoes that spoke to her focus on literature rather than discipline. She genuinely loved Shakespeare and poetry, often becoming so absorbed in the beauty of the texts that she failed to notice the undercurrents of cruelty flowing through her classroom. When bullying occurred, she would offer weak admonishments like asking students to be respectful, but she never followed through with meaningful consequences. Her passive approach created a perfect environment for Derek's reign of terror to flourish unchecked, leaving vulnerable students like Marcus completely exposed to daily humiliation. The Tuesday morning ritual began like clockwork as Mrs. Henderson opened her worn copy of Romeo and Juliet to Act 2, Scene 2. She surveyed the classroom with the enthusiasm of someone who had fallen in love with literature decades ago and never quite recovered from the romance. Today they would read the famous balcony scene, she announced, and students would take turns bringing the beautiful language to life. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of joy that comes from sharing something precious, completely unaware of the dread settling over one particular student in the back corner. Marcus felt his stomach clench as Mrs. Henderson began calling on students row by row, starting from the front left and working systematically backward. This was his worst nightmare playing out in slow motion, a torture device disguised as education. He counted the students between himself and the current reader, calculating desperately how many paragraphs each person might read, hoping against hope that the class period would end before his turn arrived. His palms grew slick with sweat as he gripped his desk, knuckles white with tension. Derek Thompson had positioned himself perfectly to witness the upcoming spectacle, turning slightly in his seat to watch Marcus squirm. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth as he recognized the familiar signs of Marcus's mounting panic. Derek whispered something to Jake Morrison, who stifled a laugh and glanced back at Marcus with predatory anticipation. They both knew what was coming, and they were already savoring the entertainment. As each student finished their portion, Marcus's heart hammered harder against his ribs. He considered raising his hand to ask for the bathroom pass, but Mrs. Henderson discouraged interruptions during reading time. He thought about faking illness, but his previous attempts had been met with skepticism from teachers who assumed he was simply trying to avoid participation. His breathing became shallow and rapid as the reading moved closer to his row, each completed passage bringing him closer to his inevitable humiliation. The student directly in front of Marcus stumbled through Juliet's lines about names and roses, her voice uncertain but functional. Mrs. Henderson nodded encouragingly and made a note in her gradebook. Marcus's vision began to tunnel as panic set in fully, his mind racing through impossible escape scenarios while his body remained trapped in his desk. The weight of 28 pairs of eyes that would soon focus on him felt crushing, and he knew that in mere moments his stutter would transform him from invisible to spectacle, providing Derek and his followers with fresh ammunition for weeks of mockery to come. Marcus Williams. Romeo's lines, Act 2, Scene 2. Mrs. Henderson announced, her finger pointing directly at him with the casual indifference of someone choosing a lottery number. The classroom fell into an expectant hush that felt more like the silence before an execution than a literature lesson. Marcus stared down at the page, the black letters swimming before his eyes as if they were drowning in his own fear. He could feel Derek's anticipatory gaze boring into the back of his head like a laser, and somewhere in his peripheral vision, he caught Jake Morrison leaning forward in his seat with the eager attention of a spectator at a gladiator match. He opened his mouth and attempted the first word, but what emerged was a fractured, stuttering mess that bore little resemblance to Shakespeare's flowing verse. The beautiful language that sang so perfectly in his mind became a battlefield in his throat, each syllable fighting against the next in a war he could never win. His tongue felt thick and uncooperative, betraying him at the moment he needed it most. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled through each phrase, the romantic poetry transforming into a painful display of linguistic failure that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Derek Thompson seized the opportunity like a predator pouncing on wounded prey. In a voice dripping with mock sympathy, he began repeating Marcus's stuttered words, exaggerating each stumble and repetition until the cruel mimicry became a performance in itself. But, Romeo," Derek whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, his voice taking on an artificially dramatic tone that made Marcus's struggle seem like comedy rather than tragedy. Jake Morrison immediately joined in, and soon Ashley and Brittany Chen were stifling giggles behind their hands, their shoulders shaking with barely contained laughter. The classroom erupted into a symphony of cruelty that masqueraded as amusement. Students who normally showed Marcus indifference suddenly became active participants in his humiliation, their laughter building upon itself until it filled every corner of the room. Marcus's face burned with shame as he continued attempting to read, each failed word adding fuel to the fire of mockery surrounding him. Mrs. Henderson finally looked up from her gradebook, her expression showing mild irritation rather than genuine concern. "Derek, that's enough," she said with the same tone she might use to quiet chattering during a movie. "Please let Marcus finish reading." Her intervention was so weak and half-hearted that it only served to highlight how little protection she offered, leaving Marcus to suffer through the remaining lines, while his tormentors simply shifted to silent gestures and smirks that she could not see. The bell releasing students from second period English could not ring soon enough for Marcus Williams. He gathered his books with trembling hands, keeping his head down as Derek's laughter still echoed in his ears, along with the whispered imitations that followed him out of room 214. His cheeks burned with humiliation that felt like a physical wound, the kind that throbbed with each heartbeat and refused to fade. The hallway buzzed with the normal chaos of students changing classes, but Marcus felt completely isolated, as if he were walking through the world behind a sheet of glass that separated him from everyone else. The school library became his refuge, a quiet sanctuary where the harsh fluorescent lights were dimmed and the sounds of teenage cruelty could not penetrate. Patterson, the elderly librarian, glanced up from her desk with a knowing smile as Marcus hurried past the circulation desk toward the literature section. She had grown accustomed to seeing him seek shelter here during lunch periods and free study halls, never asking questions but always offering a welcoming nod that made him feel less alone. Marcus pulled his personal copy of Hamlet from his backpack, the paperback so well worn that the spine had cracked and several pages had begun to separate from the binding. He settled into a corner chair beside a tall window that overlooked the school courtyard, opening the book to Act 3 and losing himself in the familiar rhythm of Shakespeare's language. Here, surrounded by thousands of books and blessed silence, his mind could finally quiet and his breathing could return to normal. Emily Rodriguez had been watching Marcus from across the library, her heart aching as she witnessed the obvious pain etched across his features. She was a quiet girl herself, preferring the company of books to the social games that consumed most of her classmates. But she possessed a compassionate spirit that made her sensitive to the suffering of others. As she observed Marcus reading with an intensity that bordered on reverence, she noticed something remarkable happening. His lips moved silently as he followed the text, and his entire posture changed from defeated to engaged, as if the words on the page were breathing life back into him. She had been in English class during his humiliation, feeling sick to her stomach as Derek and his followers turned Shakespeare into a weapon of mockery. But now, seeing Marcus absorbed completely in the very same literature, Emily began to understand that there was far more to this boy than his stutter revealed. The sanctuary of his bedroom welcomed Marcus like an old friend, as he closed the door behind him and finally allowed his shoulders to drop from their defensive hunch. Here, surrounded by his beloved books and free from the crushing weight of other people's expectations, he could breathe freely for the first time since morning. The afternoon sunlight streamed through his window, casting long shadows across the Shakespeare volumes that lined his desk like faithful soldiers waiting for their commander's attention. Marcus opened his weathered copy of Hamlet to the third act, his fingers finding the famous soliloquy with the practiced ease of someone who had visited these pages countless times before. He stood before his mirror, the same one that reflected his stammering, humiliated face each morning. But now something magical began to happen. Taking a deep breath that seemed to draw power from the very depths of his soul, Marcus began to speak the immortal words that had captivated audiences for centuries. "To be or not to be? That is the question," he began, his voice flowing like honey over silk, each syllable perfectly formed and delivered with the kind of emotional depth that professional actors spent years trying to achieve. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. The words poured from him with such natural rhythm and understanding that Shakespeare himself might have wept to hear his creation brought to life with such passion and clarity. His mother Sarah paused outside his bedroom door, her hand frozen halfway to the doorknob as she prepared to tell him dinner would be ready soon. The voice she heard through the thin walls could not possibly belong to her son, the boy who struggled to order coffee without stumbling over his words. This voice was rich and confident, filled with dramatic power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. She pressed her ear closer to the door, hardly daring to breathe, as Marcus continued his performance. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? The oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, Marcus continued, his voice building with intensity as he gestured dramatically at his reflection. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she realized the incredible gift her son possessed. Hidden away from the world like a treasure buried beneath layers of fear and shame, she wanted desperately to burst through the door and embrace him, to tell him how magnificent he sounded. But something held her back. This was his private world, his secret strength, and she understood instinctively that her interference might shatter the spell that allowed him to find his voice in solitude. The morning hallways of Westfield High buzzed with the typical energy of teenagers rushing between classes, lockers slamming shut in rhythmic percussion, and conversations overlapping in a symphony of adolescent chaos. But for Marcus Williams, walking these corridors had become a gauntlet of humiliation that began the moment he stepped through the school's front doors. Derek Thompson had discovered a new form of entertainment that proved far more devastating than confining his cruelty to English class, and he wielded it with the precision of a master torturer who understood exactly where to strike for maximum damage. As Marcus approached his locker, trying to make himself as invisible as possible while navigating the crowded hallway, Derek's voice cut through the morning noise like a blade. But Marcus!" Derek called out in an exaggerated stutter that drew immediate attention from nearby students. "Do you need help with your locker combination?" The cruel mimicry was performed with theatrical flair that turned Marcus's genuine struggle into a comedy routine for Derek's growing audience. Jake Morrison immediately joined the performance, adding his own stuttering impression while pretending to fumble with his own locker in mock difficulty. The twins Ashley and Brittany Chen giggled and whispered to their friends, spreading the entertainment like wildfire through the hallway. What had once been Derek's private amusement in English class now became a public spectacle that followed Marcus wherever he went, transforming every transition between classes into a fresh opportunity for humiliation. Other students who had never participated in the bullying before found themselves drawn into the mob mentality that Derek's confidence created. Freshmen who normally would never dare mock an upperclassman began repeating Derek's stuttering impressions, their voices joining the chorus of cruelty that seemed to echo from every corner of the school. Even students who felt uncomfortable with the bullying remained silent, their inaction serving as tacit approval for Derek's escalating campaign of torment. Marcus felt the walls of isolation closing in around him like a prison with no escape. The simple act of walking from one class to another became a nightmare journey through hostile territory where every face seemed to wear a smirk of anticipation. His backpack felt heavier with each step, weighed down not just by textbooks, but by the crushing burden of being the school's primary source of entertainment. He found himself taking longer routes through less crowded hallways, arriving late to classes and earning disapproving looks from teachers who had no idea he was simply trying to survive another day in an environment that had become completely toxic to his existence. Thursday morning brought an unusual excitement to Mrs. Henderson's English classroom as she stood before her students with an announcement that made her eyes sparkle with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for her most beloved literary events. The annual Westfield High Shakespeare Festival was approaching, she declared, her voice carrying the reverent tone of someone about to share a sacred tradition. This year marked the 25th anniversary of the competition, making it more prestigious than ever before, with judges from the local theater company and even a representative from the State University's drama department scheduled to attend. Each student would have the opportunity to perform any Shakespeare piece of their choosing. Mrs. Henderson continued, her hands gesturing expressively as she described the event. Monologues, scenes, sonnets, or even musical adaptations were all welcome, as long as they showcased the beauty and power of the bard's immortal words. The winner would receive a $500 scholarship and the honor of representing Westfield High at the regional competition in the spring. More importantly, she emphasized with the passion of a true believer, participants would experience the joy of bringing Shakespeare's characters to life, connecting with emotions and themes that had resonated with audiences for over 400 years. The classroom buzzed with a mixture of interest and apprehension as students began to consider whether they possessed the courage to perform on stage in front of their peers and distinguished judges. Some whispered about which pieces might be easiest to memorize, while others worried about the public speaking aspect that terrified even the most confident teenagers. The competition represented both opportunity and risk, a chance for glory balanced precariously against the possibility of public failure. Derek Thompson leaned back in his chair with the satisfied smile of someone who had just been handed fresh ammunition for his campaign of cruelty. He turned deliberately toward the back of the classroom where Marcus sat hunched over his desk, making sure his voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "Hey, Marcus," Derek announced with mock enthusiasm that dripped with venom. "You should totally enter the Shakespeare competition. Just try not to stutter through it." "Okay." The suggestion was delivered with such casual cruelty that it seemed almost friendly to anyone not paying close attention, but the underlying malice was unmistakable to those who understood Derek's true intentions. Jake Morrison snorted with laughter while the twins exchanged knowing glances, their faces lighting up with anticipation of the entertainment such a performance might provide. Mrs. Henderson heard Derek's comment but interpreted it as encouragement rather than mockery. Nodding approvingly at what she perceived as student support for participation, Marcus felt his face burn with shame as 27 pairs of eyes turned toward him, some curious, some pitying, but all focused on his reaction to Derek's public challenge disguised as suggestion. The idea planted itself in Marcus's mind like a seed in fertile soil, growing stronger and more persistent despite every logical reason to abandon it immediately. Throughout the rest of English class and into his next period, the possibility of entering the Shakespeare competition haunted him with both terrifying and thrilling implications. He knew Derek's suggestion had been meant as mockery, another opportunity to showcase Marcus's failures in front of an even larger audience. But something deeper stirred within him that refused to be silenced by fear alone. In his heart, Marcus understood Shakespeare's words better than any student in that classroom. Perhaps better than Mrs. Henderson herself. He had spent countless hours absorbing every nuance, every emotional beat, every rhythmic pattern that made the language sing with immortal beauty. The characters felt like personal friends who had shared their deepest secrets with him in the privacy of his bedroom. When he read Hamlet's soliloquies or Romeo's passionate declarations, he didn't just understand the words intellectually, he felt them resonate in his bones with the kind of connection that most people never experienced with literature. But the gap between private understanding and public performance felt as vast as an ocean filled with hungry sharks. The thought of standing on a stage in front of hundreds of students, teachers, and judges while attempting to speak without stuttering made his stomach clench with nauseating anxiety. Derek and his followers would be there, waiting eagerly for him to fail, ready to turn his moment of vulnerability into fresh material for weeks of additional torment. Emily Rodriguez appeared beside his locker during lunch period, her approach so quiet that Marcus almost didn't notice her until she spoke his name gently. She had been thinking about the Shakespeare competition announcement all morning, and more importantly, she had been thinking about what she had witnessed in the library the previous day. The way Marcus had read with such obvious passion and comprehension told her something that Derek Thompson and his cruel followers could never understand. "I saw you reading Hamlet yesterday," Emily said softly, her voice careful and kind. "You looked like you really understood it, like you connected with it in a way that most people never do." Her words carried no trace of pity or condescension, only genuine observation and gentle encouragement. She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "I think you should consider entering the competition. I think you might surprise everyone, including yourself. Her belief in him felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, offering hope where he had seen only darkness. Emily's words echoed in Marcus's mind for the rest of that day and into the sleepless night that followed. Her quiet confidence battling against years of accumulated shame and fear. By morning, something fundamental had shifted inside him, a tiny spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished by Derek's mockery or his own paralyzing anxiety. During breakfast, as his mother Sarah prepared for another double shift at the hospital, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would enter the Shakespeare competition, not because Derek had suggested it as a joke, but because Emily had seen something in him that he had almost forgotten existed. The choice of material came to him without hesitation, as if the words themselves were calling out to be given voice. Hamlet's famous soliloquy from Act 3 had always resonated with him on the deepest level, the prince's internal struggle between action and inaction, mirroring Marcus's own daily battle between speaking and silence. To be or not to be, that is the question, he whispered to himself as he walked through the hallways that morning, the words providing strength against the usual chorus of cruel imitations that followed in his wake. After school, when the building had emptied of students and most teachers had departed for the day, Marcus began his secret training regimen in abandoned classrooms throughout Westfield High. He discovered that room 107, tucked away in a corner of the building near the old auditorium, remained unlocked and completely deserted after 3 o'clock. Here, surrounded by empty desks and fading afternoon light, he could practice without fear of discovery or judgment. The transformation that occurred during these private sessions was nothing short of miraculous. Standing before the classroom's whiteboard as if it were a stage, Marcus would begin the soliloquy with the same hesitant voice that failed him in public. But within moments, something magical would happen. The words would begin to flow like water, finding its natural course, each syllable falling into perfect rhythm with the next, until his voice filled the empty room with power and emotion that would have made professional actors weep with envy. At home, his bedroom became a laboratory for perfection, where he worked on gestures, facial expressions, and the subtle variations in tone that could transform good recitation into transcendent performance. His mother heard him through the walls night after night, her heart swelling with pride and wonder at the gift her son possessed, even as she worried about the courage it would take for him to share that gift with the world. The news of Marcus's entry into the Shakespeare competition spread through Derek Thompson's social network like wildfire consuming dry leaves. It was Jake Morrison who first spotted Marcus's name on the official sign-up sheet posted outside the main office. His discovery delivered to Derek with the breathless excitement of someone bearing incredible gossip. Derek's initial reaction was pure disbelief, followed by delicious anticipation, as if Christmas morning had arrived months early, with the promise of entertainment beyond his wildest dreams. Within hours, Derek had transformed Marcus's courageous decision into the school's most anticipated spectacle, rallying his followers and expanding his audience with the skill of a master showman promoting the greatest circus act ever conceived. He moved through the hallways like a campaign manager, spreading word of the upcoming performance with mock enthusiasm that barely concealed his predatory glee. Can you believe Marcus actually signed up for the Shakespeare thing? He would announce to anyone within earshot, his voice dripping with false amazement that made his true intentions crystal clear to everyone, except the teachers who remained blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. The betting pool began during lunch period in the cafeteria, with Derek serving as both organizer and chief instigator of the cruel wagering system that turned Marcus's upcoming performance into a gambling opportunity. Jake Morrison put $5 on Marcus not making it through the first sentence without stuttering, while the twins Ashley and Brittany Chen each wagered $10 that he would flee the stage before finishing the piece entirely. Other students, drawn by the mob mentality that Derek's confidence created, began placing their own bets on various aspects of Marcus's anticipated failure, from the number of stuttered words to whether he would forget his lines completely. Mrs. Henderson floated through these conversations like a ship passing through fog, completely oblivious to the undercurrents of cruelty swirling around her beloved Shakespeare competition. When students approached her with barely concealed smirks to ask about Marcus's entry, She interpreted their interest as genuine enthusiasm for the literary arts. "How wonderful that Marcus is participating," she would respond with sincere joy, completely missing the exchange of knowing looks and stifled laughter that followed her comments. Her genuine belief in the transformative power of Shakespeare made her blind to the reality that her competition had become a stage for potential humiliation rather than celebration. The building tension filled the school like pressure inside a kettle approaching the boiling point. With Marcus walking unknowingly through hallways buzzing with anticipation of his public destruction, while the very teacher who should have protected him remained completely unaware of the trap that had been set around her precious literary event. The Westfield High Auditorium hummed with nervous energy as students, teachers, and distinguished judges filled the red velvet seats for the 25th Annual Shakespeare Festival. Stage lights bathed the performance area in warm golden hues that transformed the familiar space into something magical and intimidating, while heavy burgundy curtains framed the stage like a portal to another world. Mrs. Henderson moved through the backstage area with clipboard in hand, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone whose literary dreams were finally coming to fruition, completely unaware that her celebration was about to become a battleground. The early performers took the stage with varying degrees of confidence and skill. Their efforts met with polite applause from an audience that included parents, teachers, and the intimidating panel of judges seated in the front row. Rebecca Martinez delivered Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene with commendable intensity, while sophomore David Chen stumbled through Romeo's balcony speech but recovered gracefully enough to earn encouraging nods from the judging panel. Each performance added to the growing atmosphere of anticipation, but none generated the electric tension that surrounded the name listed 17th on the program. Derek Thompson and his followers had positioned themselves strategically in the middle section of the auditorium, their seats chosen to provide optimal viewing angles for the upcoming entertainment they had been anticipating for weeks. As each performer concluded their piece, Derek would lean toward his companions with stage whispers designed to carry just far enough to build excitement among their expanding circle of spectators. "This is nothing compared to what's coming," he murmured to Jake Morrison during the polite applause for a competent rendition of Puck's closing speech from A Midsummer Night's Dream. The betting pool had grown substantially since lunch period, with students throughout the auditorium checking their watches and whispering predictions about the spectacular failure they expected to witness. Ashley and Brittany Chen passed notes back and forth, their barely suppressed giggles drawing disapproving glances from nearby teachers who assumed they were simply excited about the literary performances. Other students who normally showed Marcus nothing but indifference now craned their necks to search for him in the backstage area, their faces lit with the cruel anticipation of spectators at a public execution. As the 16th performer finished their piece to enthusiastic applause and exited stage left, Henderson approached the microphone with her clipboard, completely oblivious to the shift in audience energy that occurred as she prepared to announce the next name. The auditorium fell into a hush that felt more predatory than respectful, with Derek Thompson sitting forward in his seat like a hunter preparing for the moment his prey would finally emerge from hiding. "Our next performer is Marcus Williams," Mrs. Henderson announced into the microphone, her voice carrying the same warm enthusiasm she had shown for every previous student, completely unaware that she was about to unleash a moment that would change everything. She glanced toward the backstage area expectantly, her smile faltering slightly when Marcus failed to appear immediately, concern beginning to creep across her features as seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity of uncomfortable silence. Marcus stood frozen in the wings, his entire body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane as the weight of 300 expectant faces pressed against him through the heavy curtains. His carefully memorized lines seemed to evaporate from his mind like morning mist, replaced by a roaring panic that made his vision blur and his breathing become shallow and rapid. The months of secret practice, the hours of perfect recitation in empty classrooms and his bedroom sanctuary, all of it felt meaningless now that the moment of truth had arrived with terrifying finality. Derek Thompson sat forward in his seat with the eager anticipation of someone about to witness the greatest show on earth, his eyes practically glowing with malicious excitement as he whispered final predictions to his followers. "This is going to be epic," he murmured to Jake Morrison, both boys struggling to contain their laughter as they imagined the spectacular failure about to unfold before their eyes. The twins Ashley and Brittany Chen clutched their phones, ready to capture every stuttered word and moment of humiliation for posterity and social media immortality. Mrs. Henderson called Marcus's name again, this time with genuine concern coloring her voice as she realized something was seriously wrong. The audience began to shift restlessly in their seats, the polite silence transforming into something more uncomfortable as whispers started to ripple through the auditorium. Parents exchanged puzzled glances, while teachers craned their necks to see what was causing the delay in the program. Finally, Marcus Williams stepped onto the stage, his legs moving as if they belonged to someone else entirely, his face pale as paper, and his hands shaking visibly even from the back rows of the auditorium. The stage lights felt like interrogation lamps, exposing every flaw and weakness to the merciless scrutiny of hundreds of eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. He approached the center mark that Mrs. Henderson had shown all performers during rehearsal, his footsteps echoing in the hushed auditorium like a death march toward his own destruction. Marcus stood at center stage, the harsh spotlights creating a circle of brilliant white around his trembling figure. While the rest of the auditorium faded into shadowy anonymity, he could feel the collective breath of 300 people waiting for him to fail, their expectations pressing down on him like a physical weight that threatened to crush his spirit entirely. Derek Thompson's barely suppressed laughter drifted up from the audience like poison gas, while whispered predictions of catastrophe rippled through the seated crowd with the cruel anticipation of spectators at a gladiator match. But then something extraordinary happened. Something that would be remembered and discussed at Westfield High for years to come. Marcus closed his eyes and drew a breath so deep it seemed to pull strength from the very foundations of the earth beneath him. In that moment of profound stillness, he felt the presence of every character he had ever loved, every soliloquy he had ever whispered in the sanctuary of his bedroom, every word of Shakespeare that had given him comfort during his darkest hours. The fear that had paralyzed him suddenly transformed into something else entirely, a quiet confidence that rose from the depths of his soul like dawn breaking over a battlefield. When Marcus opened his eyes and began to speak, the voice that emerged from his throat was not the stuttering, broken instrument that Derek and his followers expected to mock. Instead, rich, resonant tones filled the auditorium with the kind of power and clarity that professional actors spent decades trying to achieve. To be or not to be, that is the question, he began, each word perfectly formed and delivered with an emotional depth that seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone present and squeeze with gentle intensity. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them, Marcus continued, his voice building with passionate conviction that transformed Hamlet's internal struggle into something immediate and universal. The auditorium had fallen into absolute silence, the kind of hush that occurs only in the presence of true artistry, as 300 people found themselves transported by words they thought they knew, but had never truly heard before. Derek Thompson's smug expression melted away like wax in sunlight, his mouth falling open in shock as he witnessed the impossible transformation occurring on stage. Jake Morrison sat frozen in disbelief while the twins Ashley and Brittany Chen lowered their phones, too stunned to remember they were supposed to be documenting this moment for future ridicule. Marcus continued his performance with the kind of effortless grace that seemed to defy every law of human nature that had governed his existence up to this moment. His voice soared through the immortal lines about death and dreams, about the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, each phrase delivered with such profound understanding that even the distinguished judges in the front row found themselves leaning forward in their seats, completely captivated by what they were witnessing. This was not merely a high school student reciting memorized text, but an artist channeling the very essence of Shakespeare's genius through his own tortured soul. The transformation was not limited to his voice alone, but encompassed his entire being as Marcus moved across the stage with the natural instincts of someone born for the theater. His gestures flowed with organic precision, never forced or artificial, but arising naturally from the emotional truth of Hamlet's internal struggle. When he spoke of taking arms against a sea of troubles, his hands moved with subtle power that made the metaphor feel tangible and immediate. His facial expressions shifted with each emotional beat of the soliloquy, revealing layers of meaning that most scholars spent years studying to fully comprehend. The auditorium had become a cathedral of silence, with every breath held in collective reverence for what was unfolding before their eyes. Parents who had attended expecting nothing more than a pleasant evening of student performances found themselves witnessing something approaching the miraculous. Teachers who had taught literature for decades recognized that they were in the presence of genuine artistic gift that transcended age, experience, or formal training. Even the most disinterested students felt themselves drawn into Hamlet's philosophical meditation on existence, mortality, and the courage required to face life's inevitable sufferings. Derek Thompson sat paralyzed in his seat, his cruel confidence completely shattered as he watched the boy he had tormented for months reveal depths of talent that made Derek's own accomplishments seem shallow and meaningless by comparison. The betting pool that had seemed so entertaining hours earlier now felt like a monument to their collective blindness and cruelty. Jake Morrison's face had drained of color while the twins sat motionless, their phones forgotten as they struggled to reconcile this magnificent performance with their preconceived notions about Marcus Williams. Mrs. Henderson stood in the wings with tears streaming down her cheeks, finally understanding that she had been harboring a genuine artist in her classroom, while remaining completely oblivious to both his gift and his suffering. The competition that had begun as a celebration of literature had become something far more profound, a revelation that would change how everyone in that auditorium thought about hidden potential and the dangerous assumptions we make about one another. As Marcus delivered the final lines of Hamlet's soliloquy, his voice rose with the kind of emotional power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the auditorium, each word landing with the weight of absolute truth and profound artistry. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but rather the presence of something sacred, as if the entire audience needed a moment to absorb what they had just witnessed before they could trust themselves to respond. Then the applause began, not with the polite clapping that had greeted previous performances, but with an explosion of sound that seemed to erupt from the very souls of everyone present. 300 people rose to their feet as one, their hands coming together in thunderous appreciation that filled the auditorium like a physical force. Parents, teachers, students, and judges alike found themselves swept up in an ovation that went on and on, building in intensity as people realized they had witnessed something truly extraordinary, something that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Derek Thompson remained frozen in his seat even as everyone around him stood and applauded, his face a mask of complete shock and dawning shame that seemed to age him years in the span of seconds. The cruel confidence that had defined his identity crumbled like a house of cards as he confronted the reality of what he had tried to destroy. Jake Morrison and the twins sat equally stunned, their faces reflecting the horrible recognition of their own blindness and participation in something unforgivably wrong. Mrs. Henderson stood in the wings with tears streaming freely down her cheeks, her hands pressed to her mouth as she struggled to comprehend how she had failed to see the extraordinary gift that had been sitting quietly in the back corner of her classroom all along. The guilt of her oversight mixed with overwhelming pride and wonder as she watched Marcus bow gracefully to the audience, his transformation from victim to artist complete and undeniable. Emily Rodriguez stood in the middle section of the auditorium, her face radiant with the kind of pure joy that comes from witnessing someone you believe in achieve something magnificent. Her applause was not just appreciation for a beautiful performance, but celebration of Marcus finding his voice and claiming his rightful place in a world that had tried to silence him. She had seen his potential in the quiet moments when no one else was watching, and now the entire world could see what she had always known was there. The judges' deliberation lasted only minutes, their decision so unanimous and obvious that formal discussion seemed almost unnecessary. When Mrs. Henderson returned to the stage to announce the winner, her voice still thick with emotion from witnessing Marcus's transformative performance, the outcome felt like destiny fulfilling itself rather than mere competition results. The first place prize goes to Marcus Williams for his extraordinary rendition of Hamlet's soliloquy, she declared, prompting another eruption of applause that seemed to lift the roof of the auditorium with its intensity. Marcus stood at center stage holding his trophy and scholarship certificate, his face still glowing with the confidence that performing had awakened within him, as if discovering his voice had unlocked something fundamental about who he was meant to be. The boy who had entered the auditorium trembling with terror had been replaced by someone who finally understood his own worth and power, and that transformation was visible to everyone who looked upon him. As the crowd began to disperse and congratulations flowed from teachers, parents, and fellow students, Derek Thompson made his way slowly toward the stage, his steps heavy with the weight of genuine shame and dawning self-awareness. His usual swagger had been replaced by something approaching humility, his face showing the kind of serious reflection that comes only from having one's worldview completely shattered. When he finally reached Marcus, Derek's voice was quiet and stripped of all pretense or performance. "Marcus, I need to say something," Derek began, his words coming slowly as he struggled with emotions he had never been forced to confront before. "I was wrong about you, completely wrong about everything. What I did, what we all did, it was cruel and stupid, and I'm sorry. Really sorry." The apology carried none of Derek's usual calculated charm, but rather the raw honesty of someone genuinely confronting their own failures for the first time. Behind Derek, Jake Morrison and the twins Ashley and Brittany Chen waited their turn to offer their own apologies, their faces reflecting the same mixture of shame and newfound respect that Derek displayed. Other classmates who had participated in the mockery or simply stood by as silent witnesses approached as well, each carrying the burden of recognition that they had been part of something terrible and wrong. Emily Rodriguez watched from nearby, her heart swelling with pride and satisfaction as she witnessed the complete reversal of fortune that Marcus's courage had created, transforming him from victim to victor, while forcing his tormentors to confront the ugliness of their own behavior and choose a better path forward. The weeks following the Shakespeare Festival brought changes to Westfield High that no one could have anticipated, transforming the social dynamics of the school in ways both subtle and profound. Derek Thompson, who had spent years building his reputation on cruelty and dominance, underwent a complete metamorphosis that shocked everyone who witnessed it. He began sitting with Marcus at lunch, not as some calculated gesture of false friendship, but with the genuine desire to know the person he had so cruelly misjudged. When other students made comments about Marcus's stutter in the hallways, Derek would intervene with quiet authority that carried far more weight than his former aggression ever had. Mrs. Henderson experienced her own awakening, implementing comprehensive anti-bullying measures that went far beyond the ineffective policies that had failed Marcus so completely. She began each class with discussions about respect and inclusion, using literature as a vehicle to explore themes of prejudice, hidden potential, and the dangers of judging others by superficial appearances. Her classroom became a sanctuary where every voice was valued and protected, where students learned to recognize the difference between harmless fun and destructive cruelty. Marcus discovered that his newfound confidence extended far beyond the stage, spreading through every aspect of his life, like ripples expanding across still water. He joined the drama club immediately after the competition, where his natural talent and deep understanding of character quickly established him as an invaluable member. Patterson, the drama club sponsor, recognized his gift and began giving him leading roles in school productions, each performance building his confidence and expanding his reputation as a serious artist. His academic performance improved dramatically, as teachers who had previously overlooked him began to recognize his intelligence and insights. In English class, Marcus started volunteering to read aloud, his stutter still present but no longer paralyzing, while his classmates listened with genuine respect rather than cruel anticipation. The boy who had once hidden in the back corner of every classroom now participated actively in discussions, his thoughtful contributions earning recognition from teachers and peers alike. Sarah Williams watched her son's transformation with wonder and gratitude, seeing him emerge from years of silence and isolation to become the confident, articulate young man she had always known he could be. The scholarship money from the competition helped secure his future, but more importantly, Marcus had found his voice and learned to use it with power and purpose. Emily Rodriguez became his closest friend, and most trusted confidant. Their bond deepened by shared love of literature and mutual respect for each other's authentic selves. 6 months later, the same auditorium that had witnessed Marcus Williams's miraculous transformation was filled once again with eager spectators, but this time they had come to see him in the leading role of Westfield High's spring production of Hamlet. The boy who had once cowered in fear of speaking a single word in public now commanded the stage with the presence and authority of a seasoned professional, his voice filling every corner of the theater with passion and power that left audiences breathless with admiration. Backstage, Derek Thompson worked quietly as stage manager, his former cruelty replaced by genuine dedication to ensuring Marcus's success and the production's perfection. He adjusted lighting cues and coordinated scene changes with the same intensity he had once applied to tormenting others, but now his energy served creation rather than destruction. The friendship that had grown between them was built on mutual respect and Derek's ongoing efforts to atone for his past behavior through consistent support and loyalty. Mrs. Henderson watched from the wings with tears of pride streaming down her face, knowing that her classroom had become the birthplace of something beautiful and transformative. The anti-bullying initiatives she had implemented continued to create safer spaces for students like Marcus, while her renewed commitment to seeing potential in every child had already begun to change lives throughout the school. Emily Rodriguez sat in the front row, beaming with satisfaction, knowing that her quiet encouragement had helped spark the confidence that allowed Marcus to discover his true self and share his gifts with the world. Her belief in him had provided the foundation upon which he built his remarkable transformation from victim to victor. This story reminds us that every person we encounter carries hidden depths and untapped potential that may never be revealed if we judge them by appearances alone. Marcus Williams possessed extraordinary talent that went unrecognized for years because his stutter made him an easy target for cruelty rather than a candidate for encouragement. How many gifted individuals remain silent because fear and shame have convinced them their voices don't matter? How many Derek Thompsons could become allies instead of antagonists if they learned to look beyond surface differences and recognize the humanity in everyone around them? The next time you encounter someone who seems different or struggles with challenges you don't understand, remember Marcus's story and choose kindness over cruelty, encouragement over mockery, and compassion over judgment. You might just help someone discover they have a voice worth hearing after all.